1,200 miles away from home, I checked my garage cam before bed, just a quick routine scan, but what I saw made my heart stop. Flashing lights, loud music, strangers dancing around my car, and someone rifling through my mini fridge. My garage had become the venue for a full-blown party. The host? None other than the HOA nightmare from 3 doors down, Vera Whitmore. She even raised one of my beers to the camera like she owned the place. I had no idea this party wasn't just random chaos, it was something far more twisted. Ever had your private space turned into a neighborhood rave without your permission? Let's just say it didn't end the way Vera thought it would. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with an entitled neighbor, because this one takes the cake. My name is Elliot Harper, and 6 months ago I thought I'd found paradise. A 3-bedroom house in Maplewood Heights, where the HOA actually keeps property values up, the crown jewel. A 2-car garage I'd converted into the ultimate man cave. Smart lights, sound system, temperature control, workbench, mini fridge. This was my sanctuary after dealing with corporate politics all day. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, reasonable HOA president Linda Montgomery. I should have known it was too good to be true. I should have paid attention to the warning signs, gathering in the form of one particular neighbor who would make my existence a living hell. That neighbor was Vera Whitmore, and our first encounter should have told me everything. It was Saturday afternoon, and I was hosting a small housewarming party. 15 people, good music, barbecue on the patio, nothing crazy. Everything was perfect, until she showed up. Vera appeared at my front door around 6 p.m. with that smile. You know the one, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the smile that says, "I'm about to ruin your day." She was dressed like she was heading to a country club meeting, complete with pearls and an expensive handbag. "Hi there, neighbor," she chirped, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "I'm Vera Whitmore from 3 houses down. I just wanted to see how you're settling in." Her eyes scanned my space like a home inspector looking for violations. She commented on everything, my furniture, wall art, even the beer I was serving. Every comment was wrapped in a compliment that felt like criticism. "Oh, what an interesting choice for wall color," she said about my normal gray paint. "So bold to go with something so stark." When she spotted my garage through the sliding door, her expression shifted to disapproval. "My, that's quite an elaborate setup. I do hope everything's up to code. We're very particular about maintaining neighborhood standards here." The wine spill happened 10 minutes later. Vera was examining my bookshelf when she suddenly jerked her arm and sent her entire glass flying across my white leather couch. "Oh my goodness, how clumsy," she exclaimed. But I swear I saw a smirk as dark stains spread across the cushions. I spent 20 minutes cleaning while she offered useless advice and fake apologies. By then, my party was over, guests making polite excuses and heading home, mood completely killed. As she prepared to leave, Vera delivered what I now realize was a declaration of war disguised as neighborly concern. "I really hope you'll consider being more mindful of community standards, Elliot. We've worked so hard to maintain the character of this neighborhood. It would be such a shame if someone disrupted that balance." The first official complaint arrived 3 days later, a typed letter on HOA letterhead citing noise violations from my housewarming party. The party that ended at 9 p.m. The party where music never went above conversation level. But according to Vera, my excessive noise had disturbed the peace and violated community standards. I called Austin next door to ask if he'd heard complaints about noise. His response was telling. "Dude, the only complaint I heard was from Mrs. Henderson about how quiet it got after Vera showed up and ruined everything." That's when I made my first mistake. Instead of recognizing Vera for the manipulative psychopath she was, I decided to handle it like a reasonable adult. I thought if I followed rules perfectly, kept my head down, avoided giving her ammunition, she'd get bored and move on. So I installed security cameras to protect myself from false accusations. I upgraded my garage's smart home system with better sound dampening and programmed lights to dim after 8 p.m. I even sent a polite apology letter to the HOA, outlining steps I'd taken for future compliance. I thought technology and diplomacy would solve my Vera problem. I was wrong. Dead wrong, because while I was playing defense, Vera was planning her next move, in what she clearly saw as a war for neighborhood control. 3 weeks later, I announced my Chicago business trip at the monthly HOA meeting, a software conference my company required. 4 days of presentations I actually looked forward to. I mentioned it casually during community updates, thinking it was polite to let neighbors know I'd be away. Linda Montgomery nodded. Austin gave a thumbs up. Most people seemed disinterested. Most people. Vera was in the back row, taking notes in a leather journal when I mentioned my departure date. Something about her intense focus on this mundane information made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling aside. Surely she wouldn't be crazy enough to cause trouble while I was gone. Surely I was just being paranoid. The morning after the meeting, Vera began what I can only describe as a full-scale intelligence operation. It started innocently. She appeared at my door around 8 a.m., carrying fresh-baked cookies and wearing that predatory smile. "I wanted to welcome you properly to the neighborhood," she said, though I'd lived there over 2 months. "I know we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd love to start over." The cookies were actually delicious, which made the interaction more unsettling. She peppered me with questions disguised as friendly conversation. What time did I leave for work? Did I work from home often? Would I drive to Chicago or fly? When exactly was I leaving and returning? Each question felt reasonable alone, but together they painted a clear picture of someone mapping my schedule with military precision. The wellness checks began the next day with clockwork regularity. Every morning at 7:30 a.m., Vera appeared with transparent excuses. Monday, borrowing sugar. Tuesday, discussing community garden plans that didn't exist. Wednesday, concerned about a suspicious car that was Austin's girlfriend's Honda. Each visit lasted long enough for her to peer into my garage, ask probing questions about my routine, and make passive-aggressive comments about neighborhood standards. She had a photographer's eye for detail, often pulling out her phone to take pictures of alleged property maintenance issues, a loose fence board, leaves in my driveway, anything that could be twisted into HOA violation. What disturbed me was how she interacted with other neighbors during these reconnaissance missions. Vera positioned herself as unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator, using that role to pump people for information about my activities. I watched through security cameras as she cornered elderly Mrs. Henderson during dog walks, asking pointed questions about unusual activity at my house. She lingered by Austin's mailbox until he came out, launching into concerned discussions about whether I seemed unstable or antisocial. Most unsettling was her interaction with neighborhood teenagers, actively recruiting them to report when they saw my car leave or return, framing it as community safety, but clearly building a surveillance network centered on my movements. The psychological warfare escalated when I started working from home more before my Chicago trip. Vera had uncanny ability to appear whenever I was trying to focus on important projects. She'd ring my doorbell during video conferences, claiming urgent HOA business that always turned out fabricated. She'd start loud conversations with Austin in his driveway, right outside my office window, discussing my concerning behavior patterns and whether someone should check on my mental health. When I installed motion lights in my driveway, she filed a complaint about excessive illumination. When I programmed my system to announce visitors, she claimed the automated greetings were harassment via technology. My paranoia peaked when I discovered Vera had mapped the blind spots in my camera coverage. I noticed her during lunchtime checks, moving through my yard in precisely the pattern that would avoid detection. She was testing boundaries, looking for vulnerabilities, planning something that required detailed knowledge of my property's surveillance gaps. This wasn't random harassment, this was systematic preparation for something bigger, but I didn't understand the scope until Austin knocked on my door at midnight, 3 days before my departure, with pure terror on his face. "Dude," he whispered, glancing around like he expected Vera to emerge from shadows, "she knows you're leaving." He'd been taking out trash when he overheard Vera on her phone in her backyard, talking about timing and coordination and making sure everything was ready for Thursday night. She'd mentioned my address specifically, talking about how the antisocial tech bro would be away and how this was perfect opportunity to teach him community values. Austin tried to record the conversation, but she went inside before he could get his phone out. "I think she's planning something for your garage, man." She kept talking about community space and neighborhood unity and making him understand his place. "Whatever she's got planned, it's happening while you're gone." That conversation changed everything. What I'd dismissed as typical HOA busybody behavior was actually coordinated campaign building towards some climax timed to my absence. I spent the next 2 days upgrading security with additional cameras, motion sensors, automated alerts that would notify me instantly of any property activity. The flight to Chicago was delayed 2 hours due to weather, so I didn't reach my hotel until nearly midnight Thursday. I was exhausted from traveling, my presentation wasn't until Saturday, and I just wanted to check in, order room service, and sleep. But first, my ritual security check. Quick scan of home cameras to make sure everything was secure. I pulled up the app, expecting to see the usual nighttime view of my empty driveway and dark garage. Instead, I saw lights, movement, people. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks from travel fatigue, but as I focused on the screen, horrifying reality came into crystal clear focus. There were at least 30 people in my garage, throwing a full-scale party. The scene on my phone was like a fever dream. My workbench, where I spent countless hours building electronics and organizing tools, had been transformed into a DJ booth, complete with turntables and light show using my own smart lighting system. People were dancing where my car normally parked, grinding and jumping to music loud enough to vibrate the camera mounts. But the detail that spiked my blood pressure was the beer pong tournament being played on my $3,000 3D printer. These strangers were using my expensive precision equipment as a party table, with red Solo cups full of my craft beer lined up across the surface. Someone had dragged in furniture from God knows where, creating lounge areas throughout my carefully organized workspace. And there, orchestrating the entire production like a suburban party demon, was Vera Whitmore. She wasn't just attending this violation, she was clearly the host, coordinator, evil mastermind behind the whole operation. I watched in real-time horror as she directed people to different garage areas, pointed out where they could find more beer in my mini fridge, and posed for selfies with partygoers next to my expensive equipment. She dressed for the occasion in what looked like clubwear designed by someone who thought suburban moms attend raves, complete with sparkly top and leather pants, definitely not from her usual country club collection. This wasn't spontaneous, this was planned, coordinated, executed with military precision. The community manipulation was perhaps more infuriating than the property violation itself. As I watched through multiple camera angles, I could see Vera had somehow convinced a significant portion of our neighborhood this was a legitimate community event. She'd created actual professional-looking flyers advertising a neighborhood unity mixer and community workshop tour, supposedly hosted in my garage with my permission. The story she was telling people was that I'd graciously offered my space for community building while away, and anyone questioning the party was being antisocial and unwelcoming. Several families I recognized from HOA meetings were there with teenage kids, genuinely believing they were attending an approved community gathering. But it was the moment Vera looked directly into my main security camera that transformed my shock into pure incandescent rage. She walked deliberately to the spot where she knew the camera had best view, raised a bottle of my imported Belgian beer, and stared straight into the lens with a smile that was equal parts triumph and malice. Then, with exaggerated lip movements so there could be no misunderstanding, she mouthed, "Elliot," before taking a long drink and turning back to her guests with theatrical flourish. It was a declaration of war, delivered with precision timing and maximum psychological impact. She wanted me to know this wasn't just trespassing, it was deliberate, calculated violation, designed to make me feel helpless while I was too far away to do anything. That's when I activated lockdown mode, a feature I'd programmed into my smart home system for exactly this emergency, though I'd never imagined needing it for such a surreal scenario. With a few phone taps, every electronic system in my garage shifted into security protocol. The main door slammed shut with a mechanical thunk audible over party music, followed by the side door and window connecting to my house. The lighting system switched from party colors to aggressive red strobing that turned the whole space into a horror movie. My sound system overrode the music and began broadcasting an automated message on repeat. "This is private property. Unauthorized gathering detected. Police have been contacted and are en route. Please exit immediately." The reaction to my remote intervention was immediate and telling. While most genuine partygoers looked confused and concerned, Vera's response revealed exactly how calculated this operation had been. Instead of panic or surprise, she immediately went into damage control mode, addressing the crowd with confidence of someone who'd prepared for this exact scenario. "Don't worry, everyone," she announced over the automated warnings. "This is just a technical malfunction. Poor Elliot is having some kind of remote breakdown, but we're not going to let his technology issues ruin our community event." She'd even brought a speaker to override my sound system and was actively encouraging people to ignore lockdown protocols and continue partying. The police response was where Vera's manipulative genius really showed. By the time officers arrived, and yes, I had called 911 from my Chicago hotel, she'd positioned herself as victim of harassment rather than perpetrator of trespassing. When I tried explaining the situation to the dispatcher, then later to responding officers via phone, my story sounded insane even to me. There's a woman throwing a party in my garage while I'm in Chicago, and when I locked the doors remotely, she told everyone I was having a mental breakdown. Vera, meanwhile, was standing in my driveway, in person, with tears in her eyes, surrounded by confused neighbors, spinning a tale about organizing a community gathering with my permission, only to have me cyber-attack the event when I changed my mind. The optics were terrible. Reasonable-seeming woman being harassed by remote technology controlled by an unstable man 1,200 miles away. The officers left after an hour with warnings for both parties and instructions to work it out like adults. No arrests. No formal complaints. Vera had successfully positioned herself as victim while continuing to occupy my property without permission. The party continued 3 more hours after police left, and I watched every excruciating minute from my Chicago hotel room. Vera had effectively won the first battle by convincing officers this was a community dispute rather than criminal trespassing, and she was clearly savoring her victory. She made a point of looking into my cameras periodically throughout the night, each time with that triumphant smile, sometimes waving or blowing kisses at the lens. It was psychological torture delivered through high-definition video, and she knew exactly what she was doing. But if Vera thought police intervention had ended my ability to fight back, she was about to learn that a software engineer with unlimited remote access can wage technological warfare beyond simple door locks and automated announcements. Phase 1 of my retaliation began at exactly midnight, when most party guests were too drunk to notice subtle environmental changes. I started with gradual adjustments that would make the garage increasingly uncomfortable. The temperature control system received new instructions, dropped to 45 degrees over 30 minutes, then spiked to 85, then back down in continuous cycles that would leave everyone shivering or sweating without being obvious sabotage. The smart lighting began a slow strobe effect, not dramatic red emergency lighting from earlier, but subtle flicker that would give everyone mild headaches and make it impossible to get good photos of their fun community event. The sprinkler system activation was my Phase 1 masterstroke. I'd installed smart sprinklers throughout my property for lawn maintenance, but they were connected to the same network controlling my garage systems. At 12:15 a.m., every sprinkler head within 50 feet of my garage suddenly activated in what appeared to be catastrophic malfunction. The outdoor furniture people had dragged out for additional seating was instantly soaked, along with anyone standing in the expanded party area. People shrieked and ran for cover, but here's the beautiful part. My garage was the only dry space available, which compressed the party into an even smaller area just as I was making that space as uncomfortable as possible, with temperature fluctuations and subliminal lighting effects. Vera's damage control attempts during Phase 1 were almost admirable in their desperation. She tried framing each technological malfunction as evidence of my mental instability and long-distance harassment. "He's clearly having some kind of breakdown," she announced to the increasingly uncomfortable crowd, "but we're not going to let his technology tantrums ruin our community bonding." She even tried physically disabling my systems by locating what she thought were manual override switches. But I'd designed everything to be controlled through encrypted wireless signals precisely to prevent this tampering. Watching her frantically search for non-existent control panels while my systems continued their programmed harassment was almost worth the violation of my space. Phase 2 escalated psychological pressure by turning my garage's smart features into instruments of supernatural horror. The garage door began opening and closing in random intervals, sometimes staying open just seconds, sometimes remaining open several minutes before slamming shut without warning. Each cycle was accompanied by mechanical grinding that created ominous industrial soundtrack to complement the temperature swings and lighting effects. My smart TV, mounted where I usually watched sports while working on projects, began turning itself on and off while displaying a slideshow of all the property damage I was documenting in real time. Every broken tool, every stain on my workbench, every violation of my space played on continuous loop with timestamps and high-resolution detail. The sound system became my weapon of choice for Phase 3. Instead of playing music or making announcements, I programmed it to broadcast carefully curated psychological torture. Baby crying at random intervals, construction noise that would spike just as people tried having conversations, and, my personal favorite, recordings of neighborhood dogs barking that I'd captured over past months. The genius of this approach was that each sound was technically normal for a residential area, but the random timing and artificial amplification created an atmosphere of mounting tension and anxiety. People kept looking around for sound sources, never quite figuring out they were being systematically harassed by my home automation system. But it was during Phase 3 that Vera made the critical error that would ultimately destroy her. As technological harassment intensified and more party guests began making excuses to leave, she lost the composure that had carried her through the earlier police interaction. The mask of reasonable community organizer slipped, revealing the controlling sociopath underneath. I watched through my cameras as she screamed at people who tried to leave, accusing them of being weak and antisocial for abandoning the community event. When Austin tried suggesting maybe they should call it a night, she turned on him with genuinely frightening fury. "You're just like him. You think you're better than the rest of us. Well, I'm not going anywhere until he learns some respect." The property destruction began around 2 a.m., when Vera's frustration with my technological resistance reached breaking point. Unable to find manual controls for systems designed to be purely electronic, she began attacking my equipment with whatever improvised weapons she could find. I watched in real time as she used a hammer from my own toolbox to smash what she thought was a control panel, actually a completely unrelated piece of test equipment worth $800. Then she moved on to my 3D printer, apparently convinced it was somehow connected to my automation network, and began systematically destroying calibration mechanisms with a screwdriver. Each act of vandalism was captured in high-definition video with timestamp and crystal-clear audio of her increasingly unhinged commentary. Final guests departed around 2:30 a.m., but Vera remained in my garage another hour, destroying everything she could reach while delivering what can only be described as a deranged monologue to my security cameras. "You think you're so smart with your gadgets and computers," she ranted while smashing my perfectly organized tool storage. "But you can't hide behind technology forever. I know where you live, Elliot Harper. I know your schedule, your weaknesses, and I'm going to make your life hell until you learn to respect this community." By the time she finally left my property at 3:45 a.m., she'd caused over $3,000 in property damage and provided me with 4 hours of incriminating video evidence that would hold up in any court of law. As I sat in my Chicago hotel room, compiling footage and documenting every destroyed item, I felt cold satisfaction settling over me. Vera had played her hand perfectly tactically, but made a fatal strategic error. By allowing rage to overcome her calculating nature, she'd transformed a civil dispute into criminal matter with overwhelming evidence of her guilt. I flew back from Chicago a day early, cutting my conference short to deal with what had become a full-scale emergency. The drive from the airport felt like returning to a crime scene, which it was. I'd spent the entire flight compiling evidence, organizing timestamps, building what my lawyer friend assured me was an ironclad case for criminal prosecution. But when I pulled into my driveway and saw the actual damage in person rather than through security cameras, the scope of Vera's vindictive rampage hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just thrown a party, she'd systematically destroyed anything representing my personal interests and hobbies. My 3D printer was completely destroyed. Tool organization dismantled with deliberate malice, screws and hardware scattered in patterns suggesting intentional chaos rather than casual destruction. But property damage was just the beginning of Vera's escalating campaign. While I was documenting destruction and calculating repair costs, she was launching her counteroffensive across multiple fronts. The first salvo came as a viral social media post appearing on our neighborhood community page within hours of my return. Vera had crafted a masterpiece of victim manipulation, complete with carefully staged photos and narrative, painting her as a single mother, terrorized by an unstable tech executive. I tried to organize a simple community gathering to welcome new neighbors. Her post read, "But Elliot Harper responded by cyber-attacking our event and using technology to harass families with children. This man clearly has serious anger issues and access to surveillance equipment he's using to stalk and intimidate anyone who questions his antisocial behavior." The social media post gained traction faster than I could have imagined, shared dozens of times within hours, and attracting comments from people throughout our suburb who had never met either of us. Vera had tapped into broader cultural anxiety about technology and privacy, positioning herself as every woman standing up to big tech oppression. She included selectively edited video clips from my security cameras. Somehow she'd obtained footage showing my automated systems activating during the party, but without context of her trespassing and vandalism. The result was narrative where concerned community organizer was being harassed by antisocial programmer who used technological advantages to bully normal people. The city code enforcement complaint arrived by certified mail 2 days after my return, citing multiple alleged violations of residential zoning laws. According to the complaint, my garage conversion constituted a legal business operation because I occasionally worked on freelance programming projects in my workshop space. The document referenced evidence of commercial activity, including specialized equipment, extended operating hours, and frequent deliveries. All technically true, but completely legal under city ordinances for home office use. But Vera had done her research, finding the most obscure and technically complex regulations she could use to tie me up in bureaucratic investigations requiring official responses, documentation, and potentially expensive legal representation. The harassment campaign expanded to include my professional life when Vera somehow obtained my employer's contact information and filed formal complaint alleging I was using company equipment for personal surveillance activities. She'd crafted a detailed letter describing my extensive home monitoring system and suggesting corporate resources were being misappropriated for stalking neighbors. My boss received follow-up phone call from someone claiming to represent concerned community members, worried about my mental stability and whether I posed security risk to company data. The caller suggested my paranoid behavior and technology-embattled harassment indicated serious psychological problems that could affect job performance. But Vera's most psychologically devastating attack was her manipulation of Austin, my only potential ally in the neighborhood dispute. She'd discovered Austin was renting his house from her friend Margaret, and she used that leverage to pressure him into changing his story about the garage party. When I approached Austin to ask if he'd provide a witness statement about Vera's premeditation and planning, he reluctantly admitted he'd been advised to stay neutral in the conflict. "Look, man, I know what I saw and heard," he told me during an awkward conversation in his driveway. "But Margaret's been my landlord for 3 years, and Vera's been dropping hints about noise complaints and lease violations. I can't afford to move right now, and I can't risk getting evicted over neighborhood drama." But then Austin made a decision that changed everything. 3 weeks after initially declining to provide witness statement, he knocked on my door at 10 p.m. on Tuesday night with confession that broke the case wide open. "I can't do this anymore, man," he said, looking genuinely tormented by his moral compromise. "Vera came to my house tonight, demanding I sign some kind of statement saying you'd been harassing her for months before the party. She wanted me to lie under oath, and when I refused, she threatened to have Margaret evict me by the end of the month." He pulled out his phone and played recording he'd made of their conversation, capturing Vera's explicit threats and her admission that she'd been planning the garage invasion for weeks. Austin's courage opened floodgates for other neighbors who had been intimidated into silence by Vera's systematic campaign of social manipulation. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman with morning dog-walking routine, came forward with documentation of Vera's harassment targeting 3 previous families in our neighborhood. Each family had eventually moved away after months of HOA complaints, social media attacks, and community pressure, orchestrated by Vera whenever someone failed to defer to her authority or vision for neighborhood management. The pattern was clear and damning. Vera had been conducting a years-long campaign to drive out anyone who wouldn't submit to her control. Detective Vasquez, who had responded to the original party call, reached out to me directly after receiving Austin's recording and Mrs. Henderson's documentation. "I've been investigating complaints about this woman for 2 years," she admitted during our meeting at the police station. "But until now, we've never had solid evidence of premeditation or criminal intent. Your security footage, combined with these witness statements, gives us enough to pursue serious charges." She explained that Vera's pattern of behavior constituted criminal harassment under state law, and the property destruction during the garage party elevated the charges to felony level. Justice was finally within reach, but I knew Vera wouldn't go down without one final, desperate fight. The emergency HOA meeting to determine Vera's fate was scheduled for 7 p.m. Thursday evening in the community center conference room, but by 6:30, the parking lot was overflowing and the hallway was packed with neighbors who had never shown interest in HOA politics before. Word of the neighborhood conflict had spread throughout Maplewood Heights and beyond, with people coming from adjacent communities to witness what local social media was calling the trial of the century. Linda Montgomery, our typically composed HOA president, looked overwhelmed by the turnout and media attention. Yes, actual media attention, with reporters from 2 local news stations setting up cameras outside. What had started as simple property dispute had evolved into referendum on community values, technology privacy, and limits of neighborhood authority. Vera arrived precisely at 7 p.m., dressed like she was attending court rather than an HOA meeting. Gone was casual suburban mom attire. Instead, she wore dark business suit with pearls and carried leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to serve as legal drama prop. She was accompanied by 3 neighbors who would serve as character witnesses, including elderly Mr. Peterson from 2 streets over, who had never actually spoken to me but apparently had strong opinions about my lifestyle choices. Vera's entrance was theatrical and calculated. She paused in the doorway to survey the packed room with confidence of someone who believed she could manipulate any audience, regardless of size. The formal presentation began with Linda's attempt to establish ground rules and maintain order, but it was clear from the beginning this was Vera's show. She had prepared extensively for this moment, with poster board displays showing photos of my garage conversion, timeline charts documenting what she called my escalating antisocial behavior, and even PowerPoint presentations she'd somehow gotten permission to project on the conference room wall. Her opening statement was masterclass in emotional manipulation. I stand before you tonight not as an accuser but as a victim of technological harassment, intimidation, and the kind of antisocial behavior that threatens the very fabric of our community. Vera's victim narrative was polished and compelling, hitting every emotional note designed to generate sympathy and outrage. She described herself as recently divorced single mother, trying to rebuild her life in supportive community, only to encounter neighbor who used technological advantages to spy on and harass anyone who dared question his behavior. She painted the garage party as genuine attempts at community building that I had sabotaged through cyber attacks and long-distance intimidation. This man, she said, gesturing toward me with theatrical indignation, used his computer skills to turn what should have been joyful community gathering into nightmare of technological terror. Children were frightened by his automated threats. Elderly neighbors were confused and distressed by his harassment systems. When my turn came to present evidence, the mood shifted dramatically. I had spent weeks organizing material into a compelling timeline that demonstrated not just what happened during the garage party, but months of systematic harassment and manipulation that led up to it. The security footage spoke for itself. High-definition video of Vera and 30 other people trespassing on my property, using my equipment without permission, causing thousands of dollars in damage. But even more damning was audio evidence captured by my smart home system of Vera's increasingly unhinged commentary during her destructive rampage. Her own words, preserved in crystal-clear digital audio, revealed the calculating malice behind her victim performance. The community testimony phase was where Vera's carefully constructed narrative began unraveling. Austin took the podium first, playing the recording of Vera's threats and extortion attempts that had convinced him to come forward despite his fears about housing retaliation. His testimony was particularly powerful because everyone knew he had nothing to gain and potentially everything to lose by speaking against Vera. Mrs. Henderson followed with documentation of Vera's harassment campaigns against 3 previous families, showing clear pattern of behavior that extended far beyond her conflict with me. Each testimony chipped away at Vera's credibility, while building picture of systematic abuse that had been poisoning the neighborhood for years. But the moment that truly destroyed Vera's defense came when her own 16-year-old son, Caleb, walked to the front of the room and asked permission to speak. The silence was absolute as this teenager, clearly terrified but determined to do the right thing, took the microphone and began testifying against his own mother. "My mom has been planning this for months," he said, his voice shaking but audible throughout the packed room. She has notebooks full of information about Mr. Harper, his work schedule, his habits, even photos of his house taken from different angles. She told me and my sister that she was going to teach him a lesson about respecting community authority. The impact of a child testifying against his parent was devastating, and I could see Vera's composure finally beginning to crack. Caleb's testimony revealed details that even I hadn't known about Vera's obsessive surveillance and planning. She had been documenting my activities for months, building detailed profiles of my routines and looking for vulnerabilities she could exploit. The garage party wasn't a spontaneous community event. It was a culmination of carefully planned psychological warfare campaign designed to assert her dominance and drive me out of the neighborhood. "My mom used to be different," Caleb continued, tears now visible on his face. "But after the divorce, she became obsessed with controlling everything and everyone around her. She can't handle anyone who doesn't follow her rules or ask for her permission." Vera's response to her son's testimony was the final nail in her own coffin. Instead of maintaining her composed victim persona, she exploded into the kind of rage that revealed her true personality to everyone in the room. "He's lying," she screamed, pointing at Caleb with genuine fury. "He's just a teenager who doesn't understand adult responsibilities. They've gotten to him somehow, bribed him or threatened him or turned him against his own family." The transformation was complete and undeniable. The reasonable community organizer had vanished, replaced by unhinged narcissist who was willing to attack her own child rather than accept responsibility for her actions. The HOA board's deliberation took less than 15 minutes. When they returned, Linda Montgomery's announcement was brief and decisive. Vera Whitmore was permanently banned from holding any HOA authority. prohibited from filing further complaints without documented evidence and board pre-approval, and required to pay full restitution for property damage. But most importantly, they issued formal statements supporting my right to peaceful enjoyment of my property and condemning the systematic harassment I had endured. Vera's nuclear option revealed itself 3 days after the HOA meeting in the form of formal police report accusing me of stalking, criminal harassment, and cybersecurity crimes, supposedly violating federal law. She had spent those days crafting elaborate false narrative involving doctored screenshots, manipulated audio recordings, and testimonials from people who either didn't exist or had been misled about the situation. According to her complaint, I had been conducting months-long campaign of digital stalking that included hacking into her home computer system, intercepting private communications, and using technical expertise to terrorize her family through sophisticated cyber attacks. The accusations were serious enough that Detective Vasquez was required to investigate thoroughly, despite obvious skepticism about their validity. The investigation was the most stressful week of my life. My computers were temporarily confiscated for forensic analysis, my internet activity scrutinized by digital crime specialists, and I was required to provide detailed explanations for every aspect of my home automation system. Vera had done her research well. She knew exactly which technical terms to use and which federal agencies to invoke to make her complaints sound credible to law enforcement officials unfamiliar with smart home technology. For several days, I genuinely worried that her false accusations might somehow result in criminal charges, despite my complete innocence and overwhelming evidence of her own criminal behavior. But Vera's desperation had led her to make a fatal error. In her eagerness to craft the most damaging possible accusations, she had fabricated evidence that was easily disprovable through digital forensics. The timestamps on her hacked communications didn't match logs from my internet service provider. The screenshots she claimed showed my unauthorized access to her systems contained metadata proving they had been created on her own computer. Most damning, her allegations required technical capabilities that my home network simply didn't possess. She was essentially accusing me of being a master hacker, while evidence showed I was just a software developer with smart light bulbs and security cameras. Detective Vasquez's investigation expanded beyond analyzing my systems to include comprehensive review of Vera's pattern of false reporting and harassment. What she discovered was a years-long campaign of systematic abuse that had targeted not just me, but at least 5 other families in our neighborhood and adjacent communities. Vera had been using false police reports, fraudulent HOA complaints, and social media manipulation to drive out anyone who refused to submit to her authority or vision for community management. Each campaign followed the same pattern: initial friendly contact, escalating demands for compliance, harassment disguised as community concern, and finally false accusations designed to force her targets to move away. The arrest warrant was issued on Friday morning, and Detective Vasquez made sure to execute it at exactly 9 a.m., when maximum number of neighbors would be available to witness Vera's public humiliation. I watched from my living room window as police cars surrounded her house and officers approached her front door with handcuffs ready. The charges were extensive: filing false police reports, criminal harassment, property destruction, trespassing, and fraud related to her fabricated evidence. But beyond criminal charges, she was also facing civil lawsuits from multiple families whose lives she had disrupted through her harassment campaigns. The scene of Vera being led away in handcuffs while news cameras rolled and neighbors watched from their yards was the kind of justice you rarely see in real life. Her carefully constructed image as concerned community organizer was completely destroyed, replaced by reality of manipulative sociopath who had terrorized an entire neighborhood for years. The local news coverage was extensive, turning our suburban dispute into a cautionary tale about HOA abuse and the importance of standing up to bullies, regardless of how reasonable they might initially appear. The legal consequences were severe and comprehensive. She pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for 18 months probation, 500 hours of community service, and permanent restraining orders preventing contact with any of her previous harassment targets. The financial penalties were equally devastating. She was required to pay full restitution for all property damage, legal fees for her victims, and fines totaling more than $50,000. Her homeowner's insurance was canceled, employment prospects destroyed by criminal conviction and media coverage, and she was ultimately forced to sell her house and move out of state to escape social consequences. But perhaps the most important outcome was liberation of her children from her toxic influence. Caleb and his younger sister Lila moved in permanently with their father, who had been fighting for custody but previously lacked evidence needed to prove Vera's behavior was harmful to their well-being. Both children thrived in their new environment. Caleb's grades improved dramatically, Lila joined the school robotics club, and they were finally able to develop normal relationships with peers, instead of being used as pawns in their mother's neighborhood warfare campaigns. The neighborhood transformation was remarkable and immediate. Property values increased as word spread that the source of years of conflict and harassment had been permanently removed. New families moved into houses that had been on the market for months because of Vera's reputation for targeting newcomers. The HOA implemented new transparency and accountability measures, preventing any individual member from wielding the kind of unchecked power Vera had abused. Most importantly, people felt safe to be themselves and enjoy their properties without fear of arbitrary harassment disguised as community enforcement. My garage renovation was completed within 2 months of Vera's departure, funded partly by restitution payments and partly by my decision to upgrade everything that had been damaged into even better equipment. The space became everything I had originally envisioned, a perfect workshop where I could pursue hobbies and interests without interference. But I also opened it up for monthly community events, hosting tech workshops for kids, tool-sharing programs for neighbors, and even occasional movie nights on a projector screen. The same space that Vera had tried to claim through force and manipulation became genuine community resource through voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. 12 months after Vera's arrest, I hosted the annual neighborhood barbecue in my garage, with full participation and enthusiastic support of the entire community. The contrast with her illegal party couldn't have been more complete. This event was planned cooperatively, executed safely, and enjoyed by any hidden agendas or manipulative purposes. As I looked around at families enjoying themselves in the space that had once been the battlefield for our conflict, I realized that the best revenge really is living well and building the kind of community that toxic people can never create through fear and control. The final chapter came in the form of a thank you card that arrived exactly 1 year after the garage party incident. It was from Caleb, now thriving in his new school and building his own smart home projects as a hobby. "Thank you for having the courage to fight back," he wrote. "You didn't just save your house, you saved our family from someone who was destroying all of us with her need to control everything. So if you're dealing with your own neighborhood, Vera, remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent. Document everything, stand up for yourself and others, and never underestimate the power of community cooperation over individual manipulation. Technology can be a powerful tool for justice, but the most important technology is the one that connects people to each other in positive ways." Subscribe if you want more stories about standing up to bullies and building stronger communities. And remember, sometimes the best smart home feature is the one that helps you protect the people you care about.